This is Reset. I'm Michael Puente, in for Sasha-Ann Simons. It's Friday at noon, so it's time for the weekly news recap, our deep dive into the biggest state and local stories of the week.
Snow, wind, cold. In that order. Snow, wind, cold. Snow, wind, cold. That's what you need to know.
And this mix of high winds, poor visibility, and extreme cold arrive just as the city anticipates a surge in holiday air travel.
Chicago police looking for a gunman that shot and killed 2 teens and injured 2 others just outside Benito Juarez High School in Pilsen.
Earlier this year, the city inked a deal to let race cars zoom down a 2.2-mile stretch around Grant Park and the museum campus. But critics think the city has found itself in a bad arrangement.
Another heartbreaking loss of a Chicago police officer due to an apparent suicide.
And we have a wonderful panel today to give us a scoop. With us is Amy Guth, host of Crain Chicago business podcast, The Daily Gist. Welcome to Reset, Amy.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here.
And we've got David Greising, president of the Better Government Association. Welcome back, David.
Great to be here.
And with us is somebody who's very new to radio, so she might be a little nervous, is Becky Vevea. She's the bureau chief for Chalkbeat Chicago, and obviously she used to work here at WBEZ. Welcome back to WBEZ, Becky.
Thanks, Mike.
Got your radio voice on? Yeah. Okay, remember, you can watch the weekly news recap live on WBEZ's Facebook and YouTube pages. Well, the big story this week is the season's first big winter storm hitting just as the holiday travel was taken off. Becky, how did the storm impact schools?
Well, they did end up canceling after-school programming yesterday, but they didn't have to cancel the school day, which some people worried, Tuesday, Wednesday, they were watching the forecast thinking, are we going to be out early on Thursday as well? Schools are off for break starting today. So in Chicago, all their children are home, and they'll be off through January 9th, 10th. So 2 weeks here for Chicago public school children.
Wow. And a lot of things are closed because of the weather. Museums, courthouses, the downtown's Chris Kindle Market closed 2 days earlier. But what didn't get canceled is tomorrow's Bears game against the Buffalo Bills. Are any of you going to the Soldier Field tomorrow?
Well, we have season tickets, but we decided a while back to sell them. And I saw the aftermarket. These tickets that normally about $150 are selling for about $15 on the aftermarket's website.
An $8,
nobody wants to go.
I saw tickets for
below.
like $9.
Yeah.
You can take the whole family easily now.
Yeah, they'll pay you to go.
Right. That's right. So no one's going to head out there. Well, the storm had a big impact on area airports too, with airlines canceling hundreds of flights on one of the busiest travel days of the year. Over at O'Hare and Midway, travelers rushed to make it in or out before the winter storm hit. And as all that was going on, Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul made headlines calling for more consumer protections for airline travelers. Amy, what is he hoping to see?
It's unclear exactly what it is, but it certainly seems like it's a matter of wanting Attorney General is wanting that oversight over the airlines. So as the Department of Transportation is putting forth some guidelines and pushing for more from airlines, Kwame Raoul and 33 other state attorneys general are looking for a lot more transparency. I think that's really the big thing, because we're seeing a lot of, there's been so much that's happened to the airlines over the last couple of years, and so much frustration and so many people getting bumped off of planes. We have fewer planes in the sky. There's staffing issues. There's all that kind of thing. So really it's about, not being able to sell seats if there's not personnel to actually operate that aircraft. If you get bumped off a flight, not being able to, the airlines can't then sell a more expensive flight to the same destination. So and clear guidelines of what happens when your flight gets canceled. How do you recoup those costs? How do you get on another flight? All of those kinds of things. I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. The letter was from these AGs were sent to U.S. Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, and they say that while these new proposed regulations are great, they're positive, they just don't go far enough. So I think they want a little more, but I think the state attorneys general want a little personal oversight over some of those things too, and their ability to enforce them.
But do you think this is warranted, or you think the airlines are just sort of an easy target, given that it is a busy season, there's a storm hitting, people are frustrated? Are they easy targets, or are these concerns valid?
I think they're valid, especially as we have seen staffing issues and smaller fleets impacting travel so much. And when we look at delays, when we look at all of the things that are kind of converging at airlines right now and with carriers, a lot of people are very frustrated. A lot of people really are. At O'Hare, and that's such a major hub. So I think we're especially watching it, and we have United based here. So there's a lot to watch. But I think it is warranted. And I think some more oversight, because it's just air travel is different than it was pre-pandemic.
David, do you think the airlines are kind of an easy target on this, or is it valid?
Well, they're an easy target, but they probably deserve to be targeted in some sense, because we're accustomed to, as Amy was saying, during the pandemic, things shut down, and when passengers were willing to cut them slack, now they're having boom times. They are really making a lot of money. They are flying full flights. They are scheduling flights that sort of ghost flights that they don't actually intend to staff and fly, and passengers are if nothing else, inconvenienced. And of course, then if they then try to make you pay the extra cost, that's really unfair. So it's good that they're looking at this. I don't think the AGs are going to have much effect. Yeah. Air transportation is a national issue, and the federal government probably will want to maintain all the control it can.
Right. Well, before families head out for the holidays, Chicago's top doc and Chicago's public schools chief pleaded with parents to get kids vaccinated and to keep practicing pandemic precautions. Becky, what's the current situation with COVID in the schools?
Yeah, so we have seen increasing numbers of cases in the last few weeks. In the month of December, we did see the numbers go up. They do anticipate that they will go up even as kids are out of school. In fact, probably more, because there will be gatherings with families and cousins from other schools. And they are really encouraging that population to get vaccinated, because we know that the youngest children have the least vaccine uptake for many, many, many reasons. But they are really hoping that people will kind of, as the threat looms, as COVID continues to spread, people will finally, roll up their sleeves and have their children vaccinated as well. The under 5 category too, I have some little ones myself. They are now eligible to be vaccinated and get boosters too. And the city's public health commissioner said, we are about 17% with 1 dose in that age group, which is double the national rate, but it's still pretty low, and she really wants to see that go up. She also touted flu shots. They talked about rising flu rates. My niece and nephew had flu a couple weeks ago, and I think flu is just as rampant right now. And so they're really encouraging people to take advantage of flu vaccines and COVID vaccines. They the mayor held a press conference yesterday touting the at-home Chicago program. You can call 311 and say, hey, bring it to my house, bring it to my Christmas party, and everyone can get vaccinated. So, and absent that, they're also encouraging people to test before gathering. The government is providing free tests. And, schools are out of session now, but schools were offering people to pick up those at-home tests, right, at the schools. You can get them run through your insurance at Walgreens and CVS as well.
Well, I got to ask you this. What are some of the precautions you're taking at home? Are you still wearing masks? I know I'm not, but I got family members who still do, and they do it religiously. How about yours?
Yeah, we do. I will say personally, we do when we are out in settings where we don't know people. We went to my cousin's graduation from college last weekend. I wore masks the whole time. Big gathering. My little ones, they're 3 and 1. So getting a mask on their faces is difficult, but they also are just little, booger monsters with runny noses. And so we do test. I will say we do try to swab them when we know we're going to be exposing or going to a big party or seeing elderly people or immunocompromised people, so that at least we know if it's not COVID. I have said a few times to my husband, man, I wish there was a swab for flu and RSV too, so I could check that. But we just keep an eye on it, and we do stay home a lot. I will say we are planning to stay home through early next week, and then see my parents.
David, what about you? Are you still wearing the mask out in public, or not really?
Well, on and off. I recently contracted COVID for the first time just before Thanksgiving, and had really gone maskless for a while. And so now it's sort of back on top of my mind. So I'm back to wearing sort of the situations just Becky just described.
What about you, Amy?
I'm in the same boat. I also, try. I don't go out a lot. I mean, that's the other part of it. So much of what I do is from home, so I don't have to be out in it much. But when I am, especially travel, that's
Right.
I have twice now been the only person on
stores.
only person on a flight wearing a mask, and I am totally okay with that.
Well, this is Reset. I'm Michael Puente in for Sasha-Ann Simons. We're going behind the headlines on the weekly news recap with Becky Vevea of Chalkbeat Chicago, David Greising of the Better Government Association, and Amy Guth, host of Crain Chicago business podcast, The Daily Gist. Remember, you can watch now. You can watch on the weekly news recap live on WBEZ's Facebook page and YouTube pages. Radio people doing video, a little nervous. So you can check out the video live stream right now on the Reset's Facebook page. And we're taking some comments, and we were talking a little bit earlier about some of the airlines. And I asked, our airlines, there's some getting kind of not picked on, but is it valid? And Paige Smith wrote, they are valid. The air travel industry is and has been very successful at abusing the public. So that was a comment, I believe, on the YouTube page. But moving forward, the Pilsen community is still recovering from last Friday's tragedy. 4 students shot, 2 fatally outside Benito Juarez High School. Becky, let's start with how the community and the students and the faculty have responded.
Yeah, so there was an adjusted schedule all week this week for the students and staff over at Juarez. And the school district did send a crisis response team, additional counselors. They also have some community partnerships where, they worked with sort of folks who could help students process this grief, because there were people who heard the gunshots and even saw what happened. And that will stick with them for a very, very long time. And so, this week, I think that was sort of an all hands on deck approach and really a ultimate flexibility for everyone in that building. I think the question for me that I'm curious about as we go through the spring and the rest of the school year is, how does that last? How long will they be able to provide those additional supports? We at Chalkbeat looked a little bit at staffing in that school as it relates to counselors and social workers, and did see they do have, since 2019, they have an additional social worker and an additional counselor. So that was some good news. We have seen schools across the district staff up in those areas using a lot of the federal COVID stimulus money that the district got. Hopefully, those additions can sustain themselves beyond when that money dries up. But in this moment, I think it's really helpful for that community and for that school. They did have a sort of a walkout, peace walk the other day. Our reporter Samantha Smiley went and took some photos and really, it was very touching to see the students and the staff sort of come together and support one another. We also did take a look at the impact that the Noble. We talked to the Noble schools that they had one of the students who died and one who was injured attended nearby Noble Street campuses. That's a charter school, and they also said that they provided some additional support to their students and their staff, because these things, they happen at one school, but they can impact a lot of schools throughout the district, and this issue also impacts schools throughout the district. We've written about shootings at other schools over the years, and that's just the tragic reality. And I think we see at Juarez kind of an ongoing conversation about kind of how does the district respond in these moments.
Well, there's also a talk about school resource officers who are like police officers with guns. Earlier this week when I was doing a little reporting on it, I spoke to 24th Ward Alderman Byron Sixto Lopez, who's against these kind of resource officers, and they say that they don't work. What's been the feeling on that? Yeah,
so it's interesting. They had a special LSC meeting last night. I know WBEZ Sarah Karp, I believe, covered that. And I think that there's still a feeling from the community that that's not the answer. I mean, this is one of a couple dozen high schools who, just a little background in history, voted about 2 years ago in the wake of the George Floyd protests to remove police officers from their schools. So all the high schools in Chicago, a lot of them have these police officers. They're called school resource officers. and they started voting to remove them. They're paid for and staffed by the Chicago Police Department. I should note, sometimes I think there's a misnomer. People don't realize there are still security officers in schools, even if the police officers have been, quote unquote, removed. So Juarez was one of these schools 2 years ago that removed these officers. And a lot of people, even, as Sarah reported, on the LSC and in the community, whether or not they had those officers, they don't feel like that's the reason that this could have been prevented had they had them. And so I think there's still this overwhelming feeling that that's not the answer. But I think there are some in the community who say, well, if we had, a police presence outside, perhaps it wouldn't have happened. Or maybe at dismissal, we should have police presence. So that will continue being a conversation. And it's been a conversation before even this incident.
And do we know anything about, what led up to this? Did the police have a suspect at this time?
They don't. On last Saturday, they did release some grainy video surveillance photos. But I haven't seen anything and heard anything, any updates in terms of victims or anybody coming forward saying, hey, I know who that person is. So.
And this tragedy strikes an area, Pilsen, just as one of my favorite parts of the city neighborhoods. It's like they have a dynamic downtown area, business, night scene. There is some gentrification going over there, but overall, it's just a fabulous part of the city, and it's really hard to see this going through. Amy, what do you think about that community suffering through something like this?
I mean, it's an overwhelming thing, right? It's tough for all involved. It involves a lot of difficult decisions and difficult conversations. And I recently had a couple of conversations with some folks that were kind of thinking this was like weighing on their hearts and minds, and just they were really thinking and felt kind of, what is the answer and what can I do? And I think there's a sense of, sometimes powerlessness that can be overwhelming, but I think there's also a great sense of hope, particularly in Pilsen. There's so, as you said, there's so much to that community.
Oh, there is.
It's such a special community. And I mean, we can say that about every neighborhood in Chicago because every neighborhood is so very different, but there's so much happening in Pilsen, and there's a lot of community strength and resilience in Pilsen that I think is really lovely.
I don't want to keep mentioning this, but I did run the Chicago Marathon last in October, but it was my favorite neighborhood to run through. I did a 5K also shortly after that, and it's just great. And like David, there's so many vibrant communities in Chicago, but Pilsen is one of the ones that are, seems to be on the rebound, but still sort of have almost two sides to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm thinking as this discussion is going on about the neighborhoods that aren't seeing these improvements and are dealing with homicides all the time. We actually saw fewer homicides in 2022 than in 2021, which is remarkable given the rate of death in this city, 674 so far in 22 and 797 last year. Every one of those is the kind of situation that Becky was talking about. Every one of those people have families, et cetera, and the impact, as Becky said, it doesn't go away immediately, and in some respects never goes away. And I think a lot about these communities where this is more commonplace and they're dealing with it on an almost daily basis.
Mm-hmm. Becky, before we move on, do school resource officers normally, are they armed in most cases?
I believe they are. I mean, they are a Chicago Police Department officer, like I said, funded by and paid for by the police department, and just stationed in schools. And in addition, like I said, there are security officers. Those security officers are not armed. Those are school staff. And I've talked to folks who will say sometimes, like, the security officer, not the police officer, but the security officer, a lot of them are like the clerk, they are kind of the fabric of the school, the eyes and the ears, and they do develop really strong relationships with students oftentimes. I think about one at my son's school, even he has really good relationships and coaches the the middle school basketball team. And so I think that is, there are lots of different, machinations of security and police in schools, and they're not all created equal necessarily. And this is why the district said that individual schools could decide and take these votes as to whether or not they wanted officers in their buildings.
Well, we do know certainly this is it's a holiday season, Christmas, and we do know families are hurting out there for what happened in Pilsen, and our thoughts and prayers go out to the families and loved ones of the victims. Well, turning now to politics, the Chicago Board of Elections has officially eliminated the first mayoral candidate from February's ballot. Amy, what can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so, this was kind of the long shot candidate anyway. Johnny Logalbo was struck yesterday for two separate issues. So first of it was he had not filed the proper paperwork for the statement of economic interest, and also not received the correct number of signatures. So it was kind of this twofold thing. But again, that was a very long shot candidate. I think this is going to be a fascinating mayoral race. We're down to 10 now.
Only 10.
Only 10.
Less than last time.
less than it was. And it's just going to be so interesting. I was talking with Greg Hines, the political columnist at Crain's, recently, and it's been such an onslaught for any political reporter right now. It's like he was like, "Can I just have a minute? Do I get a minute here?" And no, he doesn't get a minute. I don't think anybody covering politics right now does, because there's just so much nationally and locally.
Sure.
But I think this is going to be a contentious one. It's going to be, there's going to be a lot. You can kind of feel it coming at you that this is going to be, because the field is so wide.
Right. Right, absolutely. Well, in the meantime, two other mayoral candidates, let's see. Well, the two other mayoral candidates will keep their spots on the ballot, at least for now.
Yeah.
Let's take a listen to what mayoral candidate Jamal Green had to say.
Today is about making sure that the voters are being put first. We have spent too much resources and time down here fighting each other.
Well, Amy, there is a feud going on between Jamal Green and Willie Wilson. What's that all about, and what's the latest?
They've kind of called peace on this and made a deal to keep them both on the ballot without having to kind of pull a lot of stuff on each other, right? Mm-hmm. Without it being this really contentious and labor-intensive sort of battle. What I think is interesting, though, had this proceeded, there would have been a residency challenge against Willie Wilson. That would move forward, kind of questioning whether or not he truly resides in a Wacker Drive penthouse or this other home in suburban Hazelcrest. So that would have been interesting, but peace has been declared.
A truce declared.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, but now Willie Wilson's campaign is still challenging 5th Ward Alderman Roderick Sawyer's candidacy, correct?
That's right, yeah. And Sawyer, I mean, he's an interesting one, right? Because I think what we sometimes lose in that is he is the son of Eugene Sawyer, who was Chicago mayor from 1987 to 89. So he's got that kind of legacy, family political piece there. But that case will move forward. That's moving to a hearing.
And he will be claiming the Harold Washington connection in competition with Chuy Garcia.
As will.
But Garcia and Sawyer are two who really will be duking that out, and his only hope probably to emerge as a leader is to really wrap himself up in the Harold Washington banner, right?
Oh, I think absolutely.
Well, in between Sawyer, Green, and Willie Wilson, and even some of Lori Lightfoot as well, the question is the really where the black vote ends up. And then you have Brandon Johnson. I mean, you have most of the people in this race are African American, and so how do you where will that vote fall? And I think that is partly where why these challenges are happening, because if you can get some of them off the ballot, then you have a better chance of picking up precincts.
Well, let me. I know it's kind of early and we got a big field, but is Lori Lightfoot still the one to beat? She's the incumbent. A lot of controversies, but is she still the one? Still.
Any sitting mayor is tough to beat. She gets to hold press conferences all the time that reporters actually show up at. She gets to set the agenda in ways that a candidate outside the fifth floor office of City Hall does not. However, she's got a lot of baggage. She has lost the support of the progressive wing that helped put her into office. Becky talked about the importance of the black vote. The Latino vote is going to be very, very important. And in Chuy Garcia, we have somebody who not only comes from the progressive wing, but also likely will resonate with the Latino vote. There's also the sort of liberal white vote, and that also would be probably a deciding aspect of who emerges. It's not a foregone conclusion that Lightfoot gets through to the runoff. it could be that she gets knocked out before then.
Yeah, I mean, certainly she has the most name recognition alongside Chuy Garcia, I would say. But you have, again, other candidates who could capture, like Lakefront Liberals, don't count out, you've got Sophia King in the 4th Ward, who, really has a lot of that South Lakefront and Hyde Park. That's where her ward is. And Paul Vallis, former schools chief, who, again, it's funny because a lot of these people are repeat runners.
Right.
They're running again. They ran either in 2019 or in 2015 even, Willie Wilson.
Or both.
Or both, yeah. Exactly. And so it's very interesting to see, I think, Sophia King, Rod Sawyer, and Paul Vallis probably are the only newcomers, besides the one who's still, I think, being challenged, and I'm forgetting his name, police officer. I don't have the list in front of me.
Frederick Collins.
Frederick Collins, yes.
Weren't Vallis and Garcia the top two in a poll that was out this week, and Lightfoot came in third, I think?
Yeah, there have been a lot of polls.
Right,
I feel like
right.
I haven't watched
So
all
many,
of them so
yeah.
closely, but it is so interesting because I feel like this race is very similar to 2019 and that the field was so crowded that it was sort of such a toss-up till the very end. And I remember even covering election night and seeing the polls roll in and people were like, oh, Lightfoot's right there at the top. Like, Daley's third. And so it's just, it was, I think it will similarly be a bit of a 5 to 6 way front runner top of the race.
And Lightfoot got boosted by a Sun-Times endorsement, and this time around there will not be endorsement from the Chicago Sun-Times because they're nonprofit. So voters will be left more to fend for themselves, deciding who the best choice is.
And I think in place of those news endorsements, we're going to see, we'll have to wait and see business leaders and who kind of gets behind what candidate and how that works out, because I think that's that new placeholder of this business I support or align myself with. Okay, their leadership feels this way, that perhaps carries some weight.
Union leaders
and union,
as well.
Yeah,
so
great.
Chicago Teachers Union, but also SEIU and some of these other strong unions, they're going to probably split a little between Garcia and Brennan Johnson. So it's going to be really interesting.
David, on the topic of endorsements, obviously Chicago Sun-Times is now part of the Chicago Public Media family. How influential were those endorsements? It seems like maybe they waned a little bit. Like some people, everybody has an opinion about a candidate, and it's like, why should I listen to a newspaper? But how much influence do you think they had, and will that be lost?
Well, we saw last time, because I would agree with the premise of your question that it does seem newspaper endorsements have sort of lost their place in the civic conversation. But we saw with Lori Lightfoot where she was really in the middle of the pack, and that Sun-Times endorsement came out, and it was expected that Tony Preckwinkle, the Cook County Board Chair, and Bill Daley were going to be the top two. That endorsement really knocked out Bill Daley. And so Lori Lightfoot probably would not be mayor but for that endorsement, so that they still do have some sway, even in light of the influencers these days. Social media influences a lot of vote. Social media campaigns influence a lot of vote, et cetera. But there still was last time around a very important voice editorially.
Mm-hmm. Well, a YouTube comment on WBEZ YouTube page says, let me get this name up here. My cursor kind of blocked the name. I apologize. Paige Smith writes, as Mike Royko used to say, get your popcorn. Chicago politics is the best show in town.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, let's zoom to our next topic. You like how I wrote that? The mayor right now is being criticized for the city's deal with NASCAR. David, get us up to speed, if you will, on this event. And what are the criticisms? I personally think it's going to be great, but what do I know?
Well, it should be an exciting show to watch, but the question is the city getting a good deal out of NASCAR, which is trying to use the streets of our city in order to promote their brand and extend their audience beyond the kind of southern good old boy base that they have built their huge enterprise on. And there's a lot of criticism coming out with regard to Mayor Lightfoot's working out this contract essentially with no input from the city council. Before it was publicly announced, she basically the day before invited some council members to just basically be told, hey, we've got a contract and it's going to be good. It's going to be 2 days of racing in July. And some of the concerns have to do, with other mega events. The city of Chicago has a lot of experience, especially with Lollapalooza, for example. This contract, the comparison with Lollapalooza is striking. This contract, NASCAR is paying the city $500,000 a year up front and $2 per ticket. Lollapalooza, it pays $2 million for its music festival, with 5% of the first $30 million worth of tickets, not just its skimpy $2 charge. And there's also another big issue is cleanup. Basically, NASCAR has been asked to provide a $50,000 security deposit for damages. And if there are damages, which one might expect there will be based on our experience, the two parties will sort of work out who pays for it. Well, we've seen with Lollapalooza, we've seen the cleanup costs alone go anywhere from $280,000 in 2021 when it was a smaller crowd because of the pandemic, to the high point in recent years, $645,000 of kind of remediation costs because Grant Park gets so beat up during the Lollapalooza Music Festival. So there are a lot of serious questions about whether Mayor Lori Lightfoot got a good deal from NASCAR, if she could have gotten a better deal, and if she's just really doing this to promote sort of herself in the city and being taken in kind of on the wrong end of a business deal with this race car enterprise.
Kind of a side question that came up with this came up through this was through the museums, the Shed and the Field Museum, kind of, and the the Art Museum, kind of the Art Institute rather, saying like, well, what about our things? Like, how can that's a lot of noise and a lot of vibration and a lot of stuff. How can we protect these artifacts and the animals, and how will they not be impacted? And I think that's very interesting. Chicago Sports Commission said all that's going to be addressed, but I feel like that's kind of been the theme is we'll get to it. We will address it. And it just seemed like it moved in so quickly before all the stakeholders had a chance to kind of think through their concerns with it.
I think there should be sort of an open competition with some of the drivers on the Kennedy and the Bishop Ford, because I think some of those people drive, they could take NASCAR drivers a run for their money.
Let's see how they do with our potholes.
Exactly. Yes, put them down Grand Avenue.
Right. I hope they don't get the speed light cameras, right? Turn those off for the race.
Oh, yeah.
Well, Paige Smith also writes on YouTube, better watch the Asian community. While splitting the Black and Latin community for vote, the Asian community might carry the day. I guess that's in relation to the mayor's race. Before we turn away from politics, a local developer who went undercover for the feds, building their case against former House Speaker Mike Madigan, was sentenced to prison this week. David, what can you tell us about C.Y. Young?
Well, this is the person who was caught up in the Chinatown deal, and which was part of the one of the charges with regard to Mike Madigan. He's got other issues, obviously, with I think Danny Solis is probably his bigger concern when this case ultimately does come to trial. It just shows that the feds are continuing to build their case against Madigan. As we're seeing in the Ed Burke case, it's going to take a long time to bring Madigan to trial. And Ed Burke, what it's been charged, it's going to be 3 years before he comes to trial. So we continue to watch these cases. We continue to watch the feds sort of line up the testimony they're going to need if they're going to be successful in putting Mike Madigan in jail.
A tragic story we need to touch on. There have been 3 apparent suicides among Chicago police officers over the last week. Becky, do we have any details on these officers?
I don't have many in front of me, and I will say I know that the mayor spoke yesterday about this, and I think that it's often there's a lot of debate around policing and police officers and in our city and in our country, and I think she took a moment yesterday that I thought was important and touching to acknowledge that the work that police do can be very traumatic as well, and that they deal with exposure to very intense and traumatic events daily in their work. And so I think keeping that backdrop in mind, especially heading into the holidays, and as reading with these 3 cases, keeping that in mind, I think is important for people.
Well, that is Becky Vevea of Chalkbeat Chicago, Amy Guth, host of Crain Chicago Business Podcast, The Daily Gist, and David Greising of the Better Government Association. They're sticking around. I hope you will too, because there's more news to go to. But first, let's check back with Clear Lane.
Yeah, Mike, we are still in the negative digits across Chicago. A winter storm warning remains in effect through 6 a.m. tomorrow. So it's still very windy, bitterly cold with clouds and blowing and drifting snow. Still not out of the question for this afternoon. And our high today is right around 0. Also in the news, nearly 3 years after it was first identified in China, the coronavirus is now spreading through the country quickly. Yet again, experts predict a very difficult next few months ahead for its 1.4 billion people. And we'll have more on that story during Here and Now today after 2 o'clock. Stay with us.
WBEZ is supported by Dark Matter Coffee, proudly sourcing coffees and cocoa from Central and South America. A contemporary culinary family dedicated to producing coffees and chocolate for everyone. DarkMatterCoffee.com. Get freshly roasted. If you're hitting the road this holiday season, WBEZ has some great podcasts to accompany you on your travels. You'll find something everyone will agree to listen to. Check out our full library of podcasts at WBEZ.org/podcasts.
Right now we have -3 degrees under partly sunny skies at O'Hare and Joliet, cloudy and -2. This is WBEZ.
Back now with more Reset. I'm Michael Puente, filling in for Sasha-Ann Simons. We're in the middle of our weekly news recap, so let's jump right back into the headlines.
More marijuana dispensaries could be in the works for 2023 now that the state has announced a timeline for the next round of applicants.
Staff were outside the hospital sharing information with those passing by as their union begins negotiating a new contract with the hospital.
Volodymyr Zelensky is in Washington. It is his first trip abroad since Russia invaded in February.
With us are David Greising, president of the Better Government Association, and Amy Guth, host of Crain Chicago Business Podcast, The Daily Gist, and Becky Vevea, bureau chief for Chalkbeat Chicago. And we're saying hello to the people watching us live on Facebook and YouTube. Listeners can head over to those WBEZ pages if you like a more visual experience of the weekly news recap, and you could join us there live or later. You know, in his first foreign trip since the Russian invasion of his country last February, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addressed a joint session of Congress on Wednesday.
Against all odds and doom and gloom scenarios, Ukraine didn't fall. Ukraine is alive and kicking.
That same day here in Illinois, Governor Pritzker signed legislation forbidding the state's pension funds from investing in banks or other companies based in Russia and Belarus. David, will this have a significant impact on the state's pension funds?
Well, it won't have a direct impact, really. It's $112 million worth of assets in pension funds that are worth many, many billions. It amounts to 0.005% of the pension fund investments. But the symbolic importance shouldn't be overlooked. The basically underscoring the fact that Russia is outside the scope of typical investment market activity these days. It has blacklisted itself. The part that was sort of overlooked in this bill that Governor Pritzker signed is the fact that there's going to be a task force looking into money laundering in real estate transactions, which has been a favored practice of Russian oligarchs and others trying to get assets out of that country. And the other is looking into any record of election interference. And we know that the Illinois Board of Elections database was attacked by Russians in the 2020 election. And it's worth noting that and worth looking into what are the vulnerabilities before we head into the next presidential election.
Amy, what do you think about what the governor signed?
Well, I mean, I think it's a really important move in solidarity. You know, the part of it I've been watching mostly has been business divestment from Russia, specifically Chicago-based McDonald's. How that went. At one point, it seemed almost comedic, right? Because the trademark quickly was not a thing. It was suddenly available for much more creative interpretation. It became like Uncle Vanya's. So we're gonna have this Chekhov reference happening all over the place. So just the way it shifted. I think there were the wave of people that quickly said, okay, we're cutting ties in Russia. We're exiting this Russian market. And then there were other companies that kind of had to take a minute and, like Mondelez saying, well, but that's food supply. Do we want to divest when we're talking about jobs, but we're also maybe going to be taking food out of this place? So, I think that part has been really, really interesting to watch. My Crain's colleague, Ali Maradi, has been reporting on that a lot, of just how complicated that got. After that first wave of immediate reaction, there was a lot of other considerations, particularly with real estate and legal firms that were suddenly in a really tough spot of who am I representing and what are their ties. I think that became a really huge conversation that we will continue to see the fallout from and continue to see decisions being made around for quite a while.
Well, we do have a couple of comments on our WBEZ's YouTube page from Olu Odesita. Said about Zelensky's speech, it was a heartfelt, passionate speech, though some were upset that he was not appropriately dressed. Mike Rooney said, Slava Ukraine, Chicago's Ukrainian community was extremely happy with the speech. His wife is Ukrainian, and they have extended family here. Well, Zelensky is going through a war, so maybe he didn't have a suit handy. He's got bigger things on his mind than fashion.
I think he's underscoring the fact that he's in the middle of a war and dressing appropriate to that. You see him all the time wearing these combat-type gear and underscoring that he is, just like everybody else in his country, is in the middle of fighting for their lives.
Yeah. Right. So I live in the Ukrainian village here in Chicago, and it's been a really interesting place to observe all of this. Initially that was kind of ground zero for a lot of shows of solidarity and some protests and things like that, particularly around two religious centers and a community center. But those flags are still flying quite a bit in that neighborhood. There's still yellow and blue ribbons tied to trees and along school fences. And it's really quite moving, all the displays that are in that neighborhood.
What do you think about the debate? I know a lot of it does come from more conservative Republicans, especially on social media, talking about, we may support Ukraine, but we're not crazy about all the money American taxpayers are having a foot over there. Is that valid, or is that anything that people are hearing out there?
If war were to spread outside of Ukraine into Eastern Europe, we would end up spending a lot more than what we're spending here. And the missile systems that Zelensky was here to get, the Patriot missile systems, are the kind of investment that U.S. taxpayers make in order to defend against the kind of threat Ukraine is dealing with. And so if it's looked at as a down payment in an effort to avoid much more costly investment of both blood and treasure of Americans, maybe that's one way to look at it.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we're in it whether we want to be or not, and it's a matter of committing now in a big public way or committing later, and it's going to be more costly later.
Well, sticking with state regulations for a minute, let's talk cannabis, everyone's favorite subject, especially on a cold day, right? The agency overseeing marijuana dispensary licenses announced a new license lottery for early 2023. So we might be seeing more marijuana shops in the new year. Amy, there's also some cannabis-related news from Chicago tech incubator 1871. What's that all about?
Yeah, so Cresco Labs in 1871 have announced that they're teaming up to create the Cannabis Innovation Lab. So within 1871, of course, a lot of different factions of business incubatorship, but this will be focused specifically on cannabis-based businesses, and they're going to provide technical assistance to new licensees, and they kind of have this goal of hooking up new people in the industry with veterans in the industry to try to strengthen it. What I'm very interested in is this is another piece of making Chicago kind of this stronghold in the cannabis industry. We have Cresco, we have PharmaCann, we have Green Thumb Industries, and Verano. Those are some very big players in the cannabis space, and so I think that we're really well positioned here to be this kind of hub in cannabis. What I think the next piece of that is going to be solving the banking piece of it, because cannabis is not legal federally. Banking is very difficult, so you end up being this kind of all cash business where there's sort of this workaround that's sort of like an ATM system that looks like a debit card payment, and solving that I think will be really the next big step there.
It'll be interesting to see if the incubator too taps into some of the equity efforts that have been really, I would say criticized now at this point in the game. It took a really long time to get social equity applicants up and running, and medical marijuana facilities and companies were able to really seize the market in those first couple of years. And so to the extent that an incubator at 1871 or any, changes or adjustments to how they run that social equity applicant process, I think that people are still really also watching for how Illinois and Chicago can make the cannabis market much more equitable and actually help people who are victims of the war on drugs tap into that market and benefit from it.
Because that's really what got that legislation
exactly.
passed.
That
really.
was why. That was the case they made. That was the whole sort of political spiel was we are doing right by the people who were, impacted by and imprisoned because of the war on drugs. And so I think that's something that people are really also trying to watch very closely.
Right. And let me ask you, because I live in a state right across the border, Indiana, which still doesn't have marijuana. It still has marijuana illegal. But here in Illinois and Chicago, how do sort of educators teach about marijuana usage in the schools?
That's a great pitch, Michael Puente. That's a great question. It's not something that I've really looked at much. I mean, obviously, cannabis is still an 18 and up thing. Correct? Not 21, 18 and up. Yeah. And so I think it's not really in the K-12 system at all. I will say I have, there has been some small efforts that I've read about programs at, community colleges or universities, classes about kind of cannabis growth and how to tap into creating a small business out of, marijuana. So, but thanks for the tip. Thanks for the idea. We'll put it on the story list for 2023.
That's right. There you go. Okay, we're going to stick with statewide news for a bit. David, more than 180 new laws are set to take effect on January 1st. That's a little bit more than a week, covering a wide range of issues. Are there a few that really stand out for you from that 180?
Well, anybody who lived through the midterm elections has to be aware that the Safety Act, the no cash bail being the highlight of this criminal justice reform measure that ran more than 700 pages, that is to take effect January 1st. Pardon me. There is a court challenge that still needs to be cleared out. I think December 28th we'll know what the ruling is on that, assuming it is in fact implemented. We will see changes specifically, basically the elimination of cash bail in most crimes, except for violent crimes and some others. Police now will be able to arrest people for trespassing. That's based on a fix to that bill that was done during the veto session of the legislature. Another big one is Workers' Rights Amendment. A new amendment to the Constitution goes into effect. This expands the right of people to be represented by unions in the workplace, and it's got some very interesting language, which is unique to Illinois, that to protect the economic welfare and safety at work. People have the right to have their economic welfare and safety protected. That's expansive language that we have not seen in any other state, and it has particular implications in, say, the policing, in education, and in the industrial settings. So that's going to be very important. There are others. There are now, if your car is stolen in a carjacking and whoever then has control of it parks illegally, gets red light traffic tickets, etc., you no longer will be held responsible for your car once it is stolen from you. That's good news to all of us who might be victims of a carjacking or such. And there are a few others. There's altogether about 180 laws that take effect, but those are a few of the highlights.
Well, we got about 4 more minutes left for the show. This is Reset. I'm Michael Puente, if you haven't noticed. I'm in for Sasha-Ann Simons. We're going behind the headlines on the weekly news recap with Becky Vevea of Chalkbeat Chicago, David Greising of the Better Government Association, and Amy Guth, host of Crain Chicago business podcast, The Daily Gist. Remember, you can watch now on the weekly news recap live on the WBEZ's Facebook and YouTube pages. You can also check out the video live stream right now on Reset's Facebook page. Getting back to David's talk about unionization efforts, a really big story this year. We've seen Starbucks strikes, university and museum workers organizing. This week, Northwestern Memorial Hospital staff went public with their complaints. Becky, what changes do they want?
So I think the biggest one is staffing. They want better staffing. And I don't think it's any secret if you've been to an urgent care or an ER or tried to make a doctor's appointment in the last 2 years that there are acute staffing shortages at our hospitals. And so, they talked about the fact that, they are constantly having to cover, or their patient load has increased. You're talking 15 to 20 patients you might be monitoring on a floor, which is frankly not safe for patient care either. Now, it's not clear to me. I'm sure there's some vacancies, even though there's a position available. They haven't been able to hire for it. I think hiring for these positions is difficult right now, especially after the 2.5 years we've had. It would be hard to go into healthcare right now in the pandemic. If I'm being honest, I think is that a job any of us would want? I'm not sure. It's a very challenging job right now, and so I think that is a chief concern that they want addressed. And Northwestern Memorial will have to grapple with that in negotiations. And my sense is that they are just opening these negotiations, so they are not probably close to the finish line at this point. But to have them kind of out in the public makes there a little bit more pressure for them at the table, I'm sure.
And fans of the Hideout music venue have reason to celebrate. Amy, what can you give us the latest on this?
Yeah, so the Hideout is going to reopen. They had closed. They've been closed about 2 months after an employee there, the former program director, who is an artist himself, a musical artist, described the work culture as problematic and said it was distracting, and said he did not feel safe after the building was vandalized with some racist symbols. So it had closed. There was a lot of outcry on social media. It's interesting to me how the Hideout is able to galvanize social media users so much, because we saw this around the mega development going in place there, right? There was Lincoln Yards. Thank you. I'm suddenly like, wait,
it's okay.
There's so many mega developments in my brain.
I've seen the sign so many times now.
That's
too.
right, and the flag that's planted there. They galvanized so much of their social media network to speak out about that and all that. And this was a very polarizing issue in the Hideout community. They had first made a statement on the website. They took that down. They've now said that they're going to have a new leadership reporting structure. They're going to have additional support and resources for staff. They're going to create a diversity and inclusion council, but they're going to reopen on January 10th. That's the plan.
Well, the weekly news recap for 2022 has come to an end. My thanks to Amy Guth, host of Crain Chicago Business Podcast, The Daily Gist, Becky Vevea, Bureau Chief for Chalkbeat Chicago, and David Greising, President of the Better Government Association. We appreciate you braving the cold weather, coming out here, and make sure you bundle up when you get out there.
Yeah, you had some good tips on the first half of the show.
First tips, wear gloves and stay inside.
The latex gloves, I got to get on that train.
And I want to wish everybody out there a Merry Christmas. Stay safe, stay warm, and go Bears.